Hi guys, today we're going to look at using Nexial to do desktop automation. I'm going to run through a very simple example using the Windows Notepad as our subject of testing, and so you can see how you can automate the desktop application using Nexial. Bear in mind that Nexial has a lot more feature than what I'm going to show today, so if you're interested, I would strongly encourage everyone to check out the Nexial documentation website, which I will show towards the end of this recording. And so here we have a very standard Nexial directory structure. Every Nexial project comes looking something like that. You have an artifact directory. Within that you have the bin directory, the data directory, the plan, and the script directories. Right? So to perform our desktop automation, first thing we need to do is to create a directory inside the data directory called desktop, and this is by design. So Nexial is going to scan files inside this desktop directory, so we need to create that folder first, that directory first. Inside there, then you create a directory that will represent the application that you want to test. You can call that by any name. Here I call it by Notepad only because it's our convenience and an easy way to relate to what I'm doing. So, but you could have called it by any name. However, whatever you call this by, that name is significant. So we will see in a few minutes how this name will tie in back to our script. Okay, so in this directory, then I need to create a file called application.json like this. And it is in this file that we create a configuration for our desktop automation, and Nexial will look at this file to figure out what is it that we're trying to automate and some configuration about that automation. Right, so let's take a look at that file. And that file looks something like this. I'm just going to resize it here. Okay, so in this file we see that it has it has a few different sections in here. The first section here is called AUT, which stands for application under test. So I'm sure the test community knows this terminology very well. So here we're defining our application that we want to test, and so the Nexial can look upon this section here and figure out what is that application. And so in here we define a few things. First, we define the path. This is the location of our application. In this case, my application is Notepad, so it is located here. Right? And notice the double slash in here. So single slash could be mistaken as a escape character, such as this single slash. So slash T means a tab character, right? Slash N is a new line character. So it's a little tricky. In this case, it would have been okay because there's no such thing as a slash capital W or slash capital S. But suppose if you have a directory called temp, then this could be problematic. And so to avoid this kind of confusion, you put double slash, you escape the slash, and therefore you will not be mistaken as an escape character. And so this is on purpose, done on purpose. Okay, so here's the path of my Notepad application. Here then is my executable. The Notepad application is physically called notepad.exe, that's the file name. If you want to pass in any arguments, you may put it here. So it is possible to start a Notepad application with a specific file to open, right, such as this. Something like that. If you want to start that way, you may. Of course, it's all depending on the application in question, so it may or may not understand a runtime argument. If it does, then you have the option to put something here. Okay, and similarly, some applications understand the concept of a working directory. That's not universal, but many applications do. And what this working directory is for is basically the default directory to create files, sometimes for saving settings, sometimes for saving user documents, or sometimes just to create temporary files, right? So in this particular case, we could remove this. It wouldn't make a lot of difference anyway because Notepad does not use a working directory per se. but some application might, and so you have the opportunity here to enter a working directory for that application if it should understand what that means and how to use that, so you can configure that way. Okay, the next setting is not very important, at least not for this demo. Some .NET application will come shipped with a .NET XML file, and so Nexial can read that XML file to get version number and so forth. So you could go into reporting. If that's something of interest, then you could specify that file in here. If you don't, it's okay. You will still work just the same. Okay, so this is not very critical, but this one is critical. So this one is important. So terminate existing, this flag is to instruct Nexial whether to start the application anew, like it's a fresh instance, or just to use the existing instance. So right now I leave it as false. This means that Nexial will try to detect to see if there's any Notepad already opened, and if there is, then it will use that existing copy, that existing instance that's already running. If you set this to false and the application doesn't exist, then Nexial will then take both of this path and exe information and then start one for you, right? So it's not a problem if you set to false and none is existing right now. Nexial will go ahead and start it. But if you set it to true, like this, and that Notepad instance is running, then Nexial will terminate that instance and actually all instances of Notepad, right? The main idea here is that if you want to make sure that your application always starts from the very beginning of its state, its open state, right? Whatever that state may be, you can guarantee that by setting that to true. Then Nexial will always terminate existing ones, then start a brand new one, and forcing the new one to start in its initial state, whatever that state might be. And so something to know here is that while it is possible to automate when multiple instances of the application is running, it is sometimes counterproductive, right? Because there could be multiple instances. Well, when there's multiple instances running at the same time, it's hard to tell which one we are looking at or focusing on to do the automation, and you may not automate the right copy of the right instances, and you might get some false positive or some undesired results, right? So to make sure that you get this right, we get this right, then either turn this on to true, or make sure that you only have one copy of that application running as you leave it as false here. Okay, so this sets up your application under test, and Nexial will use this information to find the application instance or start one for you if none is found. Here we have some timing information. So some application might take a little bit of time to start up. Not Notepad, of course. Notepad will start up in less than a second usually, but some application might take a bit more time because it has some lengthy initialization. Maybe it's checking against the database, or it's doing some GUI initial setup, whatever the case may be. So if you think your application needs more time, then you can turn this to a higher number. This is a millisecond, so 5,000 will be 5 seconds, right? Which is ample for Notepad in this case. And you can turn it down to a small number if you think that's not required, right? Then here comes this one section here called app, and in here we're defining the locator or the path to the application and other parts of the application. Let's take a look at Notepad now. Here's Notepad, and Notepad, like many applications, has some standard components of a Windows application. For example, it has a title bar right here on top. It has a menu bar right here, and it also has a status bar on the bottom. Right? The status bar might be a bit of a rarity, I guess. It's not as common now. It used to be very common, but it's getting less and less common these days. So status bar might be something that's somewhat unique to some applications, but usually applications will have a title bar and some menu bar. Sometimes they have icons instead, right? Things like that. So these standard components can be recognized by Nexial to perform certain component-specific actions and preparations, and so if you need them, then you can specify them in this app section, right? For the standard components that Nexial understand, you can check the documentation to find out what other ones that Nexial support. There are basically 5 of them, right? So title bar, status bar, menu bar, there's icons, and I forgot what else. But anyway, check the documentation. It can tell you all the ones that you understood as a standard component of an UI, of a GUI, of an application's GUI. But first we got to do is we got to specify the locator for the application itself, right? And here we have this thing called the XPath with this location here. So you might be wondering, how do we derive this information? Well, there's something called the UI spy, which is comes standard with the Nexial installation. So if you have Nexial installed, you would have this. So if you go down to the Nexial core directory, that's where Nexial is installed. Go to bin, go to Windows, and then you will see a file called UI spy, right? And this UI spy application is the thing that will track, will help you to track your application locators and its, I guess it's metadata, right? So, for example, this Notepad application we can find in here. If you make sure to turn on this highlighting rectangle and this mouse icon, then we can hover over this application here. Press Control, right, and hover over that, and you can see now UI Spy is identifying that specific element with the hover with this red rectangular highlight, right? And here we will see that this title bar belongs to another component, another element right here, window. And now when I click on that, you see that the entire Notepad is highlighted. So this in fact is my Notepad application. Then over here we see some attributes about this component. Particularly we're interested in 4 of them, possibly up to 4 of them. We don't need all this information to identify this specific element, right? But a combination of these 4 usually does the trick. So control type is too generic because there will be many elements with this same control type, meaning this component type. The control type window is obviously the control type for every application. So that's not a good way to use. That's not a good element to use to identify a specific object. Automation ID might be reasonable, but in this case there's none defined, and this is again up to the developer who wrote the application. So if they don't specify one, then it looks like this, right? The name might be useful, but in this case it says Untitled Notepad, which reflects this title right here. So it might work, but sometimes I might load an application or I might load a file into Notepad such that then the name might change from Untitled to something else. So this is, although it sounds pretty good, it's probably not the most reliable one. So then that ends up with class name as the most reliable one. It's most likely there's no other application by that name. There's no guarantee, but this is probably a good bet to have. So we're going to use this one here, this attribute, to build our XPath, which you can see right here, right? So this says find any element from the roots, right? And this asterisk means any element, right, from the root, which has a class name attribute of value Notepad. Now this is important to use absolute path because, as you can see here in UI Spy, we have many components listed in here. If I use non-absolute path, like this sort, right, something like that, in web automation, this will work very well, because there's not that many elements to go through. So even though there's a bit of a speed penalty, usually it's reasonable to accept that. But in the Windows application, the desktop application, there's too many elements to scan through, right? All these. And so if I were to change this to that, which means any hierarchy, right? Any location where this name is, then what Nexial will have to do is to literally scan through any and every element to see if I can find one that matches that, right? And you will stop at the first one, but the first one might have to, if you look at this right now, UI Spy show that Notepad is right here. So you scan through all these, go into all of that, go through all of that, and so on and so forth before it gets to here, right? So that's not very efficient. That's going to slow down our runtime significantly. By doing this, then we're telling Nexial to only scan for the first level, top level, right? So you literally scan through all this, scan through the root of this window element to the next, and then eventually end up here. So it's going to be a straight line down this way, and there is no recursive scanning going down into its subcomponents. So that's a lot faster. Okay. So for that reason, we use the absolute path here, and in fact, you can see more examples here. Now we're using absolute path everywhere. Okay. So using absolute path, I can say find me any element which has the class name attribute set to Notepad, right? And that, in fact, so we have here, right there, and this specify the locator or the identifier of this application. Okay, we'll skip over this for now. This is something more of an advanced topic. We can talk about this at a different time. But within the Notepad application now, then we have a series of what we call as a standard components, plus one extra one. There are other ones here, but we're going to talk just about this one here today. So these standard components, you can derive at this also using the UI Spy. So for example, to get to the title bar, I will need to have whatever the parent locator is, right? Right here, same thing, plus that child locator that identify this title bar. So again, if I go back to title bar, now we can see that the title bar is directly underneath the Notepad application, and this title bar has an automation ID. Now this time the automation ID is going to be helpful. This title bar. Underneath this Notepad application, there is no other component called title bar. So this is a pretty safe bet to use as part of our locator, right? And similarly, we'll do the same for menu bar, which is right here. Okay, also using automation ID, and status bar, same way. And you know, if one wishes, using name is equally good option, right? But we can keep it more consistent, maybe using automation ID. It really doesn't matter a whole lot at this point in time. So here I have it, automation ID that's specified for these three elements: the title bar, status bar, and menu bar. What this is going to do is going to instruct Nexial during its what we call auto scanning process. So the idea with the auto scanning is that we can tell Nexial, we can instruct Nexial to go scan a component, a desktop application, and using these as configuration, the Nexial will go scan the appropriate element and its child elements, right, or their child elements, so that we don't have to create this XPath like this locator for each and every element. We just have to describe the top level element that we're interested in, and Nexial will then take this and then do a recursive scan to scan downwards for all the elements that you can find, and that's useful for automation. We'll see that in a few minutes how that works out, right? So these are the standard components that I'm interested in this case for the Notepad application. For some reason, if you're not interested in, say, title bar or status bar, then simply remove that, and then Nexial will skip over scanning of those two elements, and you would save a little bit of time during the auto scanning process. Or you can leave it there and let the auto scanning take over and do its job, and then when you need to use a title bar, the elements already scanned. You can get to those elements pretty quickly, right? The auto scanning works like this. So you specify what you want to scan by specifying the application name, and again I'll show that script in a second. Then Nexial will look for the corresponding files of that application, and if it does not find it, then it will proceed with the auto scanning process, which then look at all these different locators and scan through the applications and to find all those elements that can be found under these specified top level elements, right? Once it finds it, it will create a file and store all the mapping into those files, and so the file serves as a cache. So next time when you're looking for the same application or the same top level elements, then Nexial would just say, well, I already have it, I won't have to scan again, and so you save your time to do this auto scanning each time. Right? Okay, so here's our standard elements, standard components for a application. We have another one here called editor, and this actually represents that this text area right here. Turns out that this text area right here is in fact Notepad. Notepad is a very simple application, so it doesn't have multiple levels. In some situation, there might be multiple levels, between the top application and that element that you want to scan. So you might have to create a different locator. But in this case, the locator is very straightforward. It's just exactly the same as that, right? Because it's a very simple UI structure, so that works out like that. Okay. All right. Now let's see how we can get the auto scanning to work. So in my script, to register an application, you use the desktop use app command, right? And here we specify Notepad. Now, if you recall from the beginning of this recording, Notepad is what we define as our directory name. Let me go back there again. And there it is. And so it's important that this name, Notepad, is the same as that name, right? So when we specify this, Nexial then is going to look under the data directory, and it's looking for a subdirectory called Windows, and then a subdirectory called whatever this is, right? Notepad in this case, and then underneath that the application.json file. So if that doesn't exist, then this command would fail because it wouldn't be able to find what it's looking for to start the desktop automation. So once we specify that, Nexial will say, okay, I found the file now, but I didn't see any files that's been auto scanned. So you will start the auto scanning process. When the auto scanning process finished, then you will find one additional file. You'll find this file here, right? Notepad.commons.json, and in this file, it will store all the common components about this application. So here you can see that it scanned and it found, right, 3 elements, as I specified: title bar, status bar, and menu bar. Title bar, if you open it up, you can see that it also scanned and found the minimize, maximize, and close button, right? So that would represent, right, these 3 buttons out here. Okay. And if you look at, say, the menu bar, you can see the same thing here. Under menu bar, we can see file, edit, format, view, and help. And sure enough, there are those 5 things, right? But if you're expanding even further into edit, then you can see these elements, right, these menu items, and going back to Notepad, you will see the same thing, right? These are the same elements in there. And so now, if we want to automate, we wouldn't have to specify the specific XPath or locator for each of these menu items. Instead, we will just use these names, right? So that's a lot simpler, and also makes your scripts a lot more readable, right? Okay, so this one registers the application. Nexial will look for files to auto scan, and if it finds no file, then you will start doing the auto scanning. If you find that file, in this case the notepad.commons.json, if it finds it, then it's done. There's no need to auto scan. The application is done, registered, and the JSON is loaded. Now we're ready to do the automation. Here I'm using a use form, right? So what this means is that I'm telling Nexial, within this Notepad application, there is a form. It's a double quote form, right? Form is just a way to divide this application into smaller portions, so that it's easier on the automation and helps you to focus a little bit more on what to automate. So let's give a quick example here. This pop-up window right here for the open dialog box, this entire thing can be viewed as one form. If you wish to, you can do that as one form. But it's also possible to divide this into multiple smaller scope, right? So for example, this right here, this pane, this shell folder view pane, this could be considered as a form. all that means is that Nexial will just do a scanning only within this bound, this boundary, this section here, right? And that can speed up your auto scanning process because you're not scanning everything, and so also the JSON file will load a little bit faster because there'll be less elements. Similarly, if you want everything, you can just do auto scanning at this level, right, which is all of that. And so now, if you do that, your scan will include this toolbar, this left panel, and then the right panel, right? And this tree control, which I'm not sure what that is. It might be a hidden element. Right? Or you can scan even at a higher level. You can make this the view, which will scan everything we just talked about, plus all those things on the bottom and so forth. Now, there's no specific right or wrong in this case, but you can choose to make your auto scanning a little bit more focused and a little bit easier to maintain if you want to make it a smaller grouping or smaller boundary, like in the case of that, right? So I'm only scanning this portion. Okay, so that's what a form is. It's not really a form where you fill in the your name and address, that kind of form. It's just a boundary that you set up. So in this case, this editor is my form. If you remember from our JSON file, it's referring to same as the application. In this case, it's a very simple application. So this being here, it's okay. It's not really causing any performance issues because this is exactly the same. I mean, the application is so small, it will just it won't give you any worse performance because you specify the application as your form. Right? But in some cases where there are a lot more elements, yes, you do want to kind of fine tune this so that you can get something a little bit more focused and more succinct. Okay. All right. When I use form, like so, then Nexial will look for another file called Notepad based on the application ID, notepad.form_name, right? So notepad.editor.json. And if you can't find a file, then again you will do the auto scanning for this form. Okay, and when it's all done, then you have the file, and there's that file, and it looks something like this. Right, there's a file, and you can see that it scans and it come up with this portion right here, right? And this portion right here, this will refer to this portion, the part that you can type text into. Okay, I believe when they first scanned it, this is not the name it came up with. I think it's something like documents, I want to say, right? But the nice thing is you don't have to stick with these names. You can change it to whatever you want. Right? I call it editor just because it's readable to me. You can call it whatever, blank form, untitled, right? Whatever you want to call that, that's fine. Change this name, save it, and then when you reload Nexial, you can then use that name just the way you have typed it in. Okay, it's the same as well for the comments. Let's just say that for some reason you don't want to call this minimized button as minimized. You want to call it something else, right? Like disappear or something like that. It's completely up to you. So you can also do that. Although minimize is a pretty good name, but you can change that if you like to. Okay, so now we did the auto scanning for both the application and the editor, the form. Now we can do the auto automation. Bear in mind again, this only happens the first time, so it will take a little bit of time to scan through the entire application. Nexial is trying to be as thorough and as complete or comprehensive as possible, so it will take a little bit of time. So if you're going to do this, you can just run this first two steps and then maybe go get a cup of coffee or something, and then when you come back, you should be done. You should have those 2 extra files. It's a one-time process, and then you're done. Right? What can now be helpful is that if you work in a team environment, someone can do this auto scanning and derive these additional files. If you were to go ahead and check this into your code repository, Git or whatever, then other team members can benefit from this. So they wouldn't have to do the auto scanning themselves. This that you have done would benefit them, and the reverse will be true. Right? They could do auto scanning for some other parts, and that will benefit you. And so this is meant to be sort of team friendly, team ready. Right? Everybody can auto scan some portion of the application, and as long as someone did it right, check this file in, then others in the team can benefit from that effort. Okay. Here I'm doing auto scanning. I finished auto scanning, then I'm doing the following automation. I want to clear off the text area in this editor. Remember, the editor is the area where you can type, this space right here. Usually when you start the application, there's nothing in here, so this will be kind of a moot. It would be kind of pointless. But if I'm running this automation over and over again, I might have some text left over from previous automation. So here, that's why I'm doing this. I'm just going to clear off whatever I already have in that editor area. Okay, and then now I'm doing a type. So type text area, I can specify name is referring to the component name. So I'm going to say on this component, type in this word, right? Type in Nexial. Okay, then followed by another command that says type append text area. So the difference is that this will override existing data. So by that token, this is also not necessary. This is a demo to show you what you can do, but strictly speaking, you just need that because it will this word Nexial will override whatever is already existing in the Notepad, right? So if in fact you don't need to run the clear, this is sufficient. This, however, will move the mouse cursor to the end of the line, actually end of the file, right? And then enter these additional text. So in the end, we should have Nexial Automation, which we're doing a validation right here to verify that. So this command will save the text in the editor and save it into text, and then we're validating that text actually is Nexial Automation. Okay, next thing we're doing, we're going to click through some menu. So here I'm clicking to the menu. What I want to do is I want to click on Edit and select all. So for example, Nexial Automation, then I want to go to Edit and select all to get this effect, right? And so the way you specify here is Edit, select all with a comma between them. And you'll recall that the file has been auto-scanned, right? We have Edit up here and select all is down here. And so that's what Nexial is taking advantage of right now, because this has been auto-scanned. It can now derive at the appropriate locators going through this mapping, right? So that's where it becomes helpful now, right? The next thing we're going to do the same thing, but instead we're going to go out, call Edit and then search Bing, okay, which will basically, take the highlight the text and then search it on Bing. Okay, let's see how. Okay, here we go. So Nexial is now running. It's going to first clear up the text that you see, followed by typing in the word Nexial, and then append to the end of that space automation. It does its validation, does a highlighting, and now does another search, and then there you have it. It's now searching against Bing for, just to show you that it's going to Bing. There, it's going to Bing and searching against that. And so that's it. That's the automation right there. Now let me point out something here. So actually, let's first look at the execution here. So here you can see that there's a validation here, right here, right? So I'll make it a little bit bigger. So we are searching for, we're ensuring or asserting that the word Nexial Automation is in fact what I see on in this text area, right? This is saved from the previous command right here. So these characters are saved into text, and now I'm validating that the text, right, text has the same value as what I expect it to be. So that in fact is true. Okay. Now, for more information about all this, so good place to go to is the Nexial documentation. So if you go to Command, Reference, and click on Desktop, right here, and then click on the basic concept and configuration, then you can go through a lot more details. What we talked about application JSON file, about common elements and scanning and so forth. Then come back to desktop commands again, and you can see like a long list of commands that's possible in Nexial, some of which requires auto scanning, but sometimes there are also a list of commands here that does not require auto scanning. If you want to specify locators and automate that directly, it's also possible. So for example, a click button, right? Anything with a name as its argument or its parameter, that means that this name represents a component that's gone through auto scanning. But if you have a locator directly, you want to use that, you can just specify it this way as well, right? So this is useful in case you just want to click a button or some very simple automation, and maybe the whole entire setting up the application JSON and so forth might be too much hassle for something very simple, right? So in that case, that's fine. You can just use this. That also works. It does require you to go figure out the locator for it. You can use it again with UI Spy, but it does take a bit more effort, right? Or if you want to scan through the entire application because you are doing regression or full testing on that application, then do the auto scanning, and then side benefit is now you can use it by name instead of locator, so your script will be a lot more readable, as you can see here, right? These things are fairly readable right here, so you can see what I'm doing. So I hope this is helpful. As always, if there's any questions, please reach out, and if you would like to see some other automation, please let me know. Thank you. Take care.